Good morning, everyone. Respected chairpersons. Thank you, Snehal and Prashant, for having me here. It's been a wonderful meeting, and I've learned quite a bit. The topic given to me is catheter interventions and idiopathic pulmonary arterial hypertension. Most of them are adults. A few children also suffer from unexplained pulmonary arterial hypertension and need palliation. A lot of activity has been going on in the field of pulmonary arterial hypertension in the last 30 years. And this activity is likely to continue over the next many, many years. And there are plenty of new things coming up, and the field is really exciting. And as time passes, our goals have been changing from symptom relief in the 1980s to deferment of worsening, and then improved exercise capacity, preserve RV function. And more recently, we are actually talking of reduction in PVR towards normal. And we are holding more meetings, more drugs, upfront combinations, goals are changing. And now we are even looking at survival beyond 10 years. So all that, it looks good for pulmonary arterial hypertension in future. However, then why do you need transcatheter palliation? Why am I talking about transcatheter palliation today? One must not forget that the majority of patients with pulmonary arterial hypertension in this world live in places where these advances have not touched them. There are huge gaps between what the guidelines say, what we would like to do, and what's happening at the ground level. And the vast majority of patients do not reach anywhere near the top of the pyramid. They are lucky if they get one drug or two drugs, and most of them don't reach even halfway up the pyramid of treatment for pulmonary arterial hypertension. Therefore, I can safely say that most of our patients in developing countries, and maybe many patients even in the developed countries, are actually facing survival graphs which resembles more the NIH study rather than the more recent Japanese study which showed 10-year survival of over 90%. I think our survival will probably something similar to the red curve or even below that. And therefore, I'm not surprised that many of our patients still need some sort of palliation. And even those patients who have initially responded to anti-PAH drugs would probably at some point in time deteriorate and come for some palliation. Therefore, we need to palliate in an attempt to defer more advanced therapies in the form of transplant. A look at history. This was a brilliant paper way back in 1964. Experimental studies on creation of an atrial septal defect in artificially created right ventricular hypertension. And these authors reported that it was the pulmonary RV hypertension was much better tolerated when the ASD was present. They also found that the effort tolerance was much better once the ASD was created in the presence of RV hypertension. In fact, they suggested that this could be used as a mode of treatment in primary pulmonary hypertension. However, atrial septectomy or septostomy did not take place for many, many years after that. In 1966, of course, septostomy came for other congenital heart disease in the form of balloon atrial septostomy. But this concept in pulmonary hypertension had to wait for many more years. Yesterday, Dr. Radhakrishnan and some other speakers have opined, have given in detail how the right ventricle behaves in pulmonary arterial hypertension and how it changes from a low volume, low pressure chamber into high pressure chamber and eventually fails with increasing RV volume and deterioration systolic function. There are many other things which go wrong, changes in the myocardium, fibrosis, changes in the catecholamine levels in the myocardium, neurohormonal changes, and eventually it's a downhill cycle. But changes in the right ventricle also affect the left ventricle because the right ventricle occupies space, pushes the septum into the left ventricle, and it causes compression and squashing of the left ventricle. Now, this echo is classical of what happens in an advanced case of pulmonary arterial hypertension. The right ventricle is dilated, baggy, fails to contract well, increase in diastolic volumes, develop tricuspid incompetence, right atrium. It may shunt right to left if there happens a PFO. And then there's poor filling of the left ventricle. Left ventricle is barely a fraction of its normal size, and therefore the left ventricular function is affected. So it becomes a biventricular disease. So what is the rationale for catheter interventions? It was noticed many years ago that patients with Eisenmenger syndrome fared better than idiopathic pulmonary arterial hypertension. It was also noticed that the few patients of idiopathic pulmonary arterial hypertension who had patent foramen ovale, they showed better effort tolerance and they survived longer than patients who had intact atrial septum. And also sometime in the late 70s, the surgeons started creating small fenestrations at the end of surgery to provide a pop-off for compensating for increased RV pressure in the postoperative period. So this created an idea of why not create a atrial septal defect and to act as a pop-off. So because the idea was to create a pop-off, the initial attempts at balloon septostomy aimed at mimicking the surgical fenestration of creating a hole of 4 to 5 millimeters, and this gave very unimpressive results. So that's the beginning of the concept of atrial septostomy for palliation. So over the last 20 years, the concept of atrial septostomy has not really become very popular still, partly because the earliest cases were done in extremely ill patients. The earlier series, in fact, even now, most of the series on atrial septostomies are small group or individual case reports. Some of the earlier papers had mortality ranging from 10 to 25%, and even now people are quite worried about having to do an atrial septostomy. But the method has evolved, and more recent papers have shown that it can be done safely with near 0% mortality. The method is shown briefly in this figure. It involves a transseptal puncture, putting a suitable wire into the left atrium, and then passing balloons starting with a small size and distending the atrial septal hole up to the desired size. As I said, initially we tried creating holes of 4 to 5 millimeters, and very often we would find that 3 months down the line we can't locate that hole. The septum would just close down, and we wouldn't see any drop in saturation. More recently, in the last 10 or 15 years, the procedure has evolved, and it involves graded dilatation with bigger and bigger balloons, and so as to produce a clear visible fall in the arterial saturation or a clear rise in the left ventricular and diastolic pressure. The aim of a septostomy is to improve the left heart filling and decompress the right heart chamber. In fact, improved left heart filling probably more important than decompressing the right heart chamber. So this figure shows the initially passed by a 5 mm balloon, and then you replace it by a bigger and bigger balloon. Sometimes people have gone up to even 16 or 18 mm balloon to dilate the septum. Now, when you create an atrial septal hole with a balloon, it doesn't form a neat circular hole the way we imagine. It often forms a very ragged hole. Often it's a linear tear, and the two edges often fall together, and the final hole that you get is often very unpredictable. Still, if we got a reasonable drop in saturations of 5 to 8%, we used to stop there and come out, and still the long-term results were quite variable. Now, what are the advantages of balloon atrial septostomy? In fact, this is the only method which has been extensively used, relatively extensively used. In 1918, there was one of the authors collected the worldwide experience of balloon atrial septostomy, and I was surprised to note that worldwide only about less than 500 cases of balloon atrial septostomy has been reported in total for idiopathic pulmonary arterial hypertension. What are the advantages? It's feasible in most cath labs. It's the least expensive. It is, we use graded dilatation to produce the desired amount of desaturation, and it does produce symptom relief, at least for a variable period. But it has some serious disadvantages. It's quite time consuming. If you do it properly the way it is recommended in the textbook, you have to do a dilatation in steps of 5 mm, 8 mm, 10 mm, go up to 16 or 18. Each time in between two balloon dilatations, give a period for stabilization, measure the hemodynamics again, and then decide to go on to the next step. Now, whenever you're doing a sick patient with idiopathic pulmonary arterial hypertension, I'm always in a hurry to come out of the cath lab as early as possible. In fact, they are very delicate patients and they often collapse on you in the cath lab. It has a high procedural risk. Earlier groups always had mortalities of exceeding 10 and sometimes approaching 25%. You need careful monitoring. People who are familiar with the procedure. It remains palliative. It does not do anything to the underlying disease or to the RV function in the long term. Effects on survival is doubtful, and there is significant chances of closure. In fact, most patients come back with increasing symptoms, and you're never sure whether it is due to closure of the atrial septal hole or whether it is advancement of the disease. Most of the time, we attribute it to the disease and go on with other treatment. And the results remain very, very inconsistent. These are the main drawbacks. It's time-consuming, high risk, and the results are very inconsistent. Now, the hemodynamic effects have been studied immediately after the procedure. Very few people have studied hemodynamics of balloon atrial septostomy 3 years or 2 years down the line. Immediately, it produces what you want. It improves the cardiac output, as shown here, in almost all cases because LV filling improves. The arterial saturation drops from 93 to 87 in this group of people, and the systemic oxygen delivery improves. Now, this set of hemodynamic improvement is common to all palliative procedures in idiopathic pulmonary hypertension. That includes atrial septostomy, atrial septal stenting, or the port shunt. The idea is to improve the left ventricular filling and drop the atrial saturation and decompress the right ventricle. This is the collection of data from all over the world. This author collected most of the balloon septostomies reported, and he classified them into 3 categories with a basal RA pressure of less than 20 and less than 10, 10 to 20, and more than 20. The benefit in terms of hemodynamics was seen across all the groups. Probably the changes was most marked in the moderate, that is 10 to 20 and about 20, but the mortality was prohibitive in the people who had RA pressure of more than 20. Probably people who have RA pressure of less than 10 do not need balloon atrial septostomy. Patients who have a RA pressure of more than 20 probably are too sick to have septostomy and may not benefit. And the best group to do balloon atrial septostomy is probably the middle group, where the RA pressure is between 10 and 20. Again, you see a drop in the RA pressure. You see a slight improvement in the cardiac index, and you see improvement, a drop in the arterial saturation. Procedure mortality in the last group was as high as 40%. So what are the indications for balloon atrial septostomy? Symptomatic patients, and perhaps the symptom which is consistently and always relieved by balloon atrial septostomy is syncopal episodes. Almost all of them are free of syncope once you do atrial septal puncture. Also, symptomatic RV failure is also an increasing indication, although the results are much less impressive. Now, with recent results, one is tempted to do this procedure even in less symptomatic patients of class 2, and I'll talk about that a little later. Now, the results are poor if the initial RA pressure is more than 20, if the PVR is very high, or the cardiac index is very low, or the basal saturation is already 90%, because if you reduce the saturation any further, a benefit of creating a large hole is negated by the systemic desaturation. Therefore, if you start with a saturation of 90% or lower, you are likely to have more problem creating a large hole. So what are the target endpoints when you do a graded balloon dilatation? You have to achieve one of these 3, whichever comes first. Arterial saturation of less than 80%. If you start with an opening saturation of 88%, you can't aim for 10% lowering. You have to stop at 80%. If you start with a saturation of above 90%, you stop when the saturation has dropped to about 80%. The idea is to drop the saturation without causing hypoxia. One of the most common occurrences and cause of death after a balloon atrial septostomy is severe resistant hypoxia in the post-procedure period. And of course, the other endpoint is the left ventricular end diastolic pressure rises to 18 or more. We have never done a proper study with a trial or a controlled study with survival after atrial septostomy. As I said, most of them have been on a symptom need to relieve symptoms, and these are only extrapolated curve from expected survival. But when you apply the same parameters of survival have been found in other follow-up study from NIH, we found that the balloon atrial septostomy does produce some improvement in survival over the first 12 to 24 months, although this effect tends to wear away as time passes. When you compare balloon atrial septostomy alone with balloon atrial septostomy with targeted drug therapy, again, you seem to give a distinct benefit when you add on targeted drug therapy. This is not an actual study. It's only projected survival from known data. So there may be a case for studying balloon atrial septostomy with targeted drug therapy. As I said, one of the problems with atrial septostomy is spontaneous closure. As many as 1/3 of the patients come back within a year with recurrence of symptoms. Therefore, we wanted to think of some way of keeping the atrial septum open, and stents are one way of doing it. The different ways of doing stents, earlier on, the method was to use a simple, straightforward vascular stent. In fact, that is still my preferred procedure as shown in that first figure. If the patient is an adult and the atria are quite roomy, the simplest procedure is to take a large, long, 4 centimeter long vascular stent and place it in the atrial septum. The atrial septum in these cases are usually quite thick and strong, and the stent does stay in position. The other ways of making sure it stays, that is to produce a dog bone appearance. Dr. Sivakumar's paper describes this, where you use a slightly oversized balloon and stop short of expanding it fully so as to leave a little waste in the middle of the balloon. Sometimes when the room is restricted, as in smaller children, or the LA is small and you do not have room for a full length vascular stent, we do what is called the diabolo stent, which has been described by Oliver Stumper's group. And we tie a small ligature with a wire, long wire, one of those epicardial pacing wires in the middle of the stent, and distend the balloon with a stent with a bigger balloon. So effectively, you get a butterfly-type configuration where the stent is small in the middle and it opens out like a flower on either side. So this helps the stent to keep in position when you have to use a shorter stent in a limited space. So these are various ways of deploying stents in the atrial septum. Now, the advantage of a stent is you do not have to over-distend the atrial hole. You do not have to go up to 18 mm or 20 mm balloon and risk the damage of trauma and spend more time in the cath lab. You could decide on the, at the first instance to go with the 8 mm stent or a 10 mm stent and go straight. A brief, very clean procedure done in a very short period of time. And this has worked very well in our hands, in other people's hands. Now, you can always go back a few months later and make the stent bigger, because the stent would have stabilized by that time. And if you want to make it bigger, you can make a 6 mm stent, open it up to 8 mm or 10 mm or even bigger 3 months down the line. So in my experience over the last 10 years, I've done atrial septal stenting in 14 patients for idiopathic pulmonary arterial hypertension. And touch wood, I have not lost any of them. All of them have done well. Brief periods of hypotension during and after the procedure, requirement of volume replacement, requirement of iron vasopressors are quite common, but I haven't had any major issues. And all of them have shown similar responses, and the mean values are shown here. No change in the PVR. The left ventricular end diastolic pressure goes up. Cardiac index does go up, and the arterial saturations drop. This happens in any form of catheter palliation of idiopathic pulmonary arterial hypertension. Now, what are the other interventions that can be done on the atrial septum? People have used fenestrated atrial septal defect in place of a stent. Yes, that's also a good idea. We could use a stent, it's less traumatic. But the ASD devices are not really meant to be used as a fenestration. and they have their own disadvantages. Quite often, the fenestration that you create closes up with the growth of tissue, especially if the device has a fabric in it. Now, therefore, a new device has been now developed called the atrial flow regulator. I think Dr. Rameshri is going to talk about this in the next lecture, and she'll be telling you more about this device which Dr. Shivkumar's group has been trying out and is still not available for use. This is the device which you'll hear more about it. It has a large hole in the center. It's been developed by the Oculotech company, and you deploy it very much like a atrial septal defect, and the hemodynamic effects are quite good and just like a atrial septostomy. Again, the advantage is you produce a predictable hole, a very consistent result, and there's absolutely no chance of spontaneous closure. The only drawback of this device that I can think of is that if you think that it is not adequate, I wonder whether you can go back and dilate it and make it bigger. You could possibly put a stent inside and make it bigger, but I don't think this device by itself is distensible. A stent allows you to increase the size of the hole if you need to as time passes. Again, I will let Dr. Rameshri talk about the hemodynamics of AFR. This is the data of the first 12 cases which they published earlier, and now I believe they have got more than 35 cases, and we'll hear that out. But again, the features are exactly similar to what I described for balloon atrial septostomy, except that the RV parameters of function don't really change. There's a trend towards fall in BNP, which doesn't meet statistical significance. What are the other catheter interventions that are possible? The same principle of creating a hole in the atrial septum can perhaps be applied at the aortopulmonary level, and that's the basis of pot shunt. Now, again, pot shunt, I think Dr. Mohanty is going to talk after me, and we already heard about this from Dr. Sheila Hawath, and I don't think I'll be spending too much time on that. A poor man's pot shunt is a stenting of the PDA. Occasional patient with idiopathic PAH has incidentally found to have small ductus arteriosus, and you could perhaps stent it and produce a pop-off or a right to left shunt, and it has the same effect as a pot shunt. Now, Dr. Sheila Hawath also mentioned about PA denervation. There's been a report on a group of cases. What it involves is an ablation procedure near the bifurcation of the pulmonary artery into right and left pulmonary artery. I'm not sure how it works because, as I understand, pulmonary vascular disease resides in the thousands and thousands of small arterioles all over the lung. And how can a neural modification at the hilum, whether it would change the histological changes in the periphery, I'm not sure. But there's something akin to renal artery denervation in hypertension, and we'll await more data on that. Now, one interesting thing is sometimes when you're investigating a patient for transcatheter palliation, you sometimes come across lesions which you missed on your initial evaluation, which could be corrected by transcatheter therapy. And therefore, I have seen examples where you have found branches of pulmonary arteries blocked by thrombus, and segmental angioplasty and stenting may help a given patient. We have seen patients who have actually presented as very severe RV hypertension and right heart failure, which people thought was idiopathic PAH, and what it was actually multiple peripheral pulmonary aortic stenosis, and the central arteries were all dilated. Of course, we heard about Abernethy shunts, many cases of idiopathic PAH when they're very sick, and they may turn out to be eminently correctable. And we just heard a case about pulmonary venous obstruction, and all of us have seen one or two case examples of these patients. And therefore, when you're investigating a patient for catheter intervention, at the same time, you may run across a correctable defect, which, if corrected, may actually reduce the PA pressure. Now, what is the rationale for pot shunt? The same as balloon atrial septostomy, only that it produces more effective reduction of RV afterload. It's both systole and diastole provides the decompression of the pulmonary artery. The desaturated blood mainly directed into the lower half, and therefore the brain and the heart are spared the desaturation. So it's quite possible that you may be able to achieve a lower level of saturation with a port shunt and still tolerate it than with a balloon atrial septostomy. And of course, it's much more consistent, and the patency is much more reliable than a simple balloon atrial septostomy. The cons are obvious. Surgical procedures on Eisenmenger or idiopathic PAH carry a very high risk. All of us know that. And port shunt carries a high risk. There's a high risk of hemorrhage at surgery, the risk of pulmonary hemorrhage, and there's a high risk of hemorrhage if you want to do it through a transcatheter procedure. And also it's a bit difficult as to what size. You have only one chance to create a hole. You do not know what is the optimum size for that. And of course, experience is still limited, and we do not know the long-term effects. I think this paper has already been alluded to, and I'm sure Dr. Mohanty will talk about it. I'll skip it, but the hemodynamic changes are similar again to the balloon atrial septostomy. This is the largest, one of the earliest and largest series on port shunt. And this is a paper with Dr. Sheila Hawath talked about the transcatheter port shunt. Authors from Boston attempted it in 4 cases and could succeed in 3 cases, and one of whom died of severe hemorrhage. The principle is that the descending aorta and the left pulmonary artery lie very close to each other as shown in the CT angio, and therefore you puncture the transeptal needle from the aorta into the left pulmonary artery. Left pulmonary artery is quite roomy in these patients, and you have a snare already placed there. So you puncture the aorta into the left pulmonary artery, and then pull the wire out and put a covered stent from aorta, descending aorta, into the left pulmonary artery. Of course, there are 2 types of CT angio described in these patients. One is where aorta and pulmonary artery are touching each other, and some of them, the aorta and left pulmonary artery, are some distance away from each other. Obviously, the second group is a very high-risk group. And this is the images after that, their procedure, and you see the stent between that, and the Doppler shows bidirectional flow. And this is the paper I referred to as the PDA stenting, a few cases of idiopathic PAH who have incidental finding of adductors. So in conclusion, catheter interventions will be necessary in future too if you want to defer transplant, and it can provide reasonable palliations, it improves symptoms and effort tolerance. It does nothing to the underlying disease, and it remains progressive, and therefore you need all the other possible steps in treatment as possible to control or inhibit the progress. Now, one interesting concept is to study the combination of palliation with a balloon atrial septostomy or atrial septal stenting and targeted medical therapy, and there is some preliminary evidence that the combination may work better. And in fact, it's tempting to think that if you could do a balloon atrial stent in a class 2 patients, start combination therapy with targeted therapy, you may get better results. And even consider port shunt at even at a later stage in the natural history, because atrial septal shunt can produce a certain amount of desaturation, and you can add on a little more desaturation by a port shunt so as to unload the lung. Therefore, these are possibilities which can be explored in future. Of course, more experience is necessary regarding all these procedures, because experience in everything is, all these procedures are extremely limited, and particularly what is the optimal mode of treatment and what is the exact timing of these procedures. Thank you.